Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Brian Thatcher, and welcome to Mercy Unbound. It's a series that aims to provide hope and avenue for healing, and one that will help you understand and then live the great mercy of God. With me today, I have a special guest. We've got an interesting topic. Dr. Tom Nelson is an osteopathic physician, lives in outside the Chicago area. He completed his family medicine residency at LaGrange Memorial. He had a major transformation in his faith through the ministry of the JP2 Healing Center in Tallahassee. That's Dr. Bob Schutz. I've interviewed Carrie and her husband, Dwayne. And today's show really ties in some ways, three different previous shows. We're going to talk about Tom's story in the Daunt's book, Man Your Post. And that show we did was 111. And Tom was also helped and healed and matured in his spiritual growth through the Unbound ministry. And I had done two shows with Lloyd and Nancy Green on shows 71 and 72. I'd suggest you look at. And then thirdly, we're going to talk about his interesting story of how a physician became the primary caregiver for one of his terminally ill patients. And I encourage people to go back to show 101 with Michelle Johnson, who wrote a book on the way of the cross for caregivers. We're going to talk about that today as well. So kind of a long-winded intro there, Tom, but welcome today to Mercy Unbound.
Thanks, Brian. It's great to be here with you.
You know, you mentioned the JP2 Center, and kind of walk us through how they helped you in your rethinking or change in attitude of what it takes to really be in the healing profession, and maybe share what you were like before that and where you look at things now.
Yes. So I was very mission oriented. I was caught up with, I got my identity from what I did. And so my practice, the things I did outside the office, I was the managing partner for our medical practice, and about 7 doctors big. And then I was a head football coach and a team physician for a Catholic high school right near my office. So it was very easy to, and this is a school that my children attended. And so in 2017, I got handed Dr. Bob's book, Be Healed. And I read it and I said, there is a doubting Thomas. There's no way this could possibly be. So I went up to Minnesota for my first healing retreat. There was a Men on Fire retreat, and yeah, my life was changed. I had a what I thought was just a physical healing. It wasn't necessarily even in the retreat itself. It was actually in the middle of the night, and I'm just as I look over your head, I see the image of divine mercy, Jesus, and that's exactly the image that appeared to me, and just healed my physical self. And as I processed this and got in touch with Dr. Bob and a priest that I know, I realized it was a spiritual and emotional healing as well. Because healing is not just happening on a physical sense; it's our whole person being healed. And so that drove me into, I got called out as a retreat junkie. Went down to Tallahassee, went to a lot of different retreats, and I just started learning. I learned part of my brain that was kind of shut off to that type of awareness, and it's been great. It's still happening, and it's really beautiful. So,
You're the first person in my 30 years of traveling, speaking on divine mercy, that said a quote you just mentioned that I say as well, and that it used to be my identity was as Dr. Thatcher and Brian the doctor, and that's who you were. You ate, drank, and slept that, and the inner person kind of got lost in all that. It's something, isn't it, that's what happens?
yes, yes, and ability to constantly surrender into that identity. Right, it takes a while for you to understand your beloved nature.
In the Daunt's book, your chapter is on Saint Joseph and courage. What really is courage?
Yeah. So I look at courage as the ability to face fear with a willingness to take on difficult situations, some of which can be dangerous, and others that can cause pain and suffering. And it really gets down to the gift of fortitude. Courage and fortitude are sometimes used interchangeably, but I really, that's a gift, one of the cardinal virtues, and it's a gift of the Holy Spirit. And I realize that it's only through that gift that we are able to conquer fear and things that are difficult.
We don't hear much about Saint Joseph in Scripture, obviously, and we don't really sometimes reflect on his courage. Can you share with us some instances where Saint Joseph displayed that courage?
Yeah, the first one, and the one that came to me as I was writing my chapter, was when he had to flee to Egypt. Message of an angel. Waking up in a dream and trusting and realizing that there was danger, and he exert his bravery and protect Mary and baby Jesus. And that's one of the main ones I think of. But also think about when Mary was pregnant, when they went into Bethlehem, and they had nowhere to stay, no room at the inn, and he's not an OB-GYN, I know that for sure. So he had to be in a position to serve and just with the most raw circumstances. And then the last one is probably the first example of courage, is when he was betrothed to Mary, and then he found out that she was with child, and he wanted to leave her, and there was so much fear, and I can imagine the fear and the concern and what people would have thought of the whole situation at that time. So those are three episodes of his courage.
In the book, you talk about one of your patients, Joan. Walk us through that from the beginning. You took care of her for a long time, didn't you?
I did. It's interesting, and I didn't think of this until recently. I was like, how did she ever end up as a patient? Well, it was 1990. I was just out of medical residency, and I was the newest doctor, so I had a lot of room in my schedule. And she tripped and fell right in front of our office. What a circumstance! So she had a bad abrasion on her knee, and so I had to care for her knee, and that's how we became acquainted. And I don't think she had seen a doctor for a long time, but there was this connection. Obviously the Holy Spirit was involved with that, and for 18 years I took care of her until. But she was an interesting woman. She was very private. Didn't It was almost like pulling teeth to have her share, but she would always ask about sports and things that were easy, and then she'd always want to know about my family. And over the years, she actually would buy gifts for my kids at Christmas time. You know how patients do that. She would um, yeah, always want to talk about. She knew I was a Cubs fan, so she was always rubbing my face in their struggles. And then she lived right across the street from a youth football field, and she would go watch games. How many ladies that age would watch football? So it was fun because that was my passion as well. So we had a lot of connection over the game of football.
So it was like you said, 18 years. And then when was she diagnosed with was it lung cancer?
Correct. I believe it was like 2007, in the summer of 2007.
And how long did she survive with that?
She about, I think it was a year and about 15 months, maybe 18 months.
So at some point, you and she discuss the end of life situation or caregiving. Walk us through that. Share with us that experience.
So back in the old days when we didn't have electronic records, so always the reports from all the consultants were sitting on top of the chart. My nurse said, "You got a lot of reports to look at," because Joan was coming in that day, and it was a really hot summer day, I remember, um, and she was an avid walker, so it was just interesting. She was, yeah. But so I looked at the reports, and the oncologist was basically introduced the conversation because the treatment wasn't helping her. So we decided at that visit that I needed to enter into that conversation about um, end of life situations, and what she was about to do, and what her support system was, so we could prepare her.
Were you surprised when you said, who's going to take care of you, and her replies and things?
Yeah, yeah, and that's probably one of the. I still think about that time, but she was sitting in the office, and when I started talking about things, I was talking about it like I knew she had someone to serve her, and she sat there with a really blank look on her face. And I'm thinking, well, I don't know much about her family except her mom and dad were deceased, and her brother was estranged, and she hadn't talked to him. But I didn't know about cousins, and so I said, do you have any out of town relatives that can help? And she said, nothing. And I'm like, okay. And then she said, yeah, I need your help. And I knew at that time that I was at like, my heart was like throbbing, it was racing. I was like, my dry mouth. I'm like, okay, like there's no one else in her life right now. So I was, I'm thinking back, I'm like, well, I could have tried to force her into like getting home care and all these services that are provided. She didn't let anybody in her house. She was so private. So I knew right then that it was going to demand something out of me. And so yeah, I said, of course. And when I said that, I was like, I wish I could have grabbed my words and almost taken them back, but they were the Lord's words for me. Yeah.
It's a disheartening answer when you hear that the person has really no family, no close friends, no loved ones, and it's like, tag, you're it. And yet, how many physicians? This is the first time I've ever heard of a physician becoming the caregiver for a dying patient, and that's what makes it fascinating to me. So, what did you say to her after you said, "I will help"?
Well, um, it was almost like a pause where she felt relieved, and I went into brain mode, like, okay, we can, we do this, and we have to just figure out how we're going to communicate. And then my another part of it, because she didn't have a power of attorney, my nurse became her healthcare power of attorney. So and then we had to meet with the attorney with all the legal things, and I made sure there was such clear boundaries and all the things that had to be taken care of. And then, yeah, the rest of the day was a blur. She left, and I knew at some point we're going to connect again, and I'll figure it out then, because how you're busy every 15 minutes with patients. And so, yeah, on the way home, I really, when I got home, I talked to my wife, and then I had to call my dad's a physician, and he's just a perfect model of St. Joseph for me as well. But I called on him and my brother, who's a physician, and they said, if it's on your heart, you have to do it.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I said, okay. So that's when the chaos started.
Now, did she have a will and everything at that point in time?
So I was all that I had to help. We had to walk her through it. She did it with her attorney, but I was just like, no, you got to do this, you got to do that. I actually went to the attorney's office with her, because otherwise she probably wouldn't have done it, because she had such a fear of encounters in relationships. So it was a very privileged spot to be in, Brian, to know that this person trusted me as much as she did.
Now, kind of walk us through, if you think of any memorable events in this whole journey, but if she deteriorated, you probably had to get more involved, and share with us some of those things.
Yeah, I was praying this morning, and what came up to me was just my work from my nurse and I would share responsibilities. I had to go there in the morning when she got debilitated, where we had to get oxygen, and she could only be on the first level of her house. So I had a key to get in. I'd walk in, I'd make her coffee in the morning. She could walk to get coffee. The bathroom was pretty close. All that stuff was, um, and then we would, buy her food, put in, figure out how. She was pretty handy with all, very simple the way she ate. And by that time, she was doing a lot of protein shakes because she wasn't eating a lot as well. But and then I go after work. One of us would stop in. We had to take her dog out too. Think about that.
Hmm.
She had a dog, Punky, and yeah, at the end of her life, she actually willed that to my nurse.
Hmm.
Yeah. So that's kind of how the typical day was until it got, closer to the end. And, probably about 6 weeks um, before well, the conversations, I think one of the things that I need to relate is that it was pretty, at the beginning when I go over there, she wouldn't even open the door, she'd hand me things through the door. That's how private she was. And
Wow.
that was like, I was like, how the heck am I going to be her caregiver? But she's not going to let me in her house, right? And she had specific places I had to go to, and it's a different. It was really, it was more than I could ever have dreamed of taking on. And so, and I really was on the verge of a emotional breakdown because I was trying to keep all those other things, all the balls in the air. I was trying to do all those other activities. And when she got closer to our conversations shifted, and anytime I want to talk about her faith, because I really wanted to get a priest in, bringing her sacraments really early on, but she just gave me the Heisman. She said, "Nope, I don't need that." She would change the subject. And then I said, okay. And then it wasn't until 6 weeks before that I said, Lord, I don't ever journey with someone that closely as they're going through dying from lung cancer, right? So I'm like, this is getting close. She's not eating now. She's all the food's not going anywhere. She's getting constipated. She's getting all these things. So I ended up calling a priest friend of mine, Jim, Father Jim, who grew up with my family in St. Mary's Parish in Riverside, and great friend of the family. And I just called him. I said, "This is the situation," and I said, "She's not going to want to see it. Can you?" I was almost like, "Can you do all these sacraments through the door? Right? Can you do them through the outside?" And so he finally said, "Tom," he goes, "The worst thing she can do is throw us out." I'm like, "Good point." So we did, and so I'll never forget it. So we went there, and she opened the door. And when she saw him, I had to stick my foot in the door to keep her from closing it. So it was really, and then when we got in the room in her dining or her living area, she sat down, and she was, I've never felt this anger, and all these emotions that were just coming out of her wounds were and I was feeling like the worst guy in the world, thinking I'm violating her choice not to have her sacraments and whatever. And so Father Jim basically started talking to her, and just like we are, and he talked about, do you know how much Jesus loves you? And she just kind of like never heard it in those terms, and to come from someone else, and having the power with his collar on, and so she finally listened, and as he started describing things, you could see that she was just so ready, and I think the sacrament of penance and reconciliation, where she was able to forgive, I think, herself for all the self-reliance, and for her making a choice to turn away from God after it was after her dad died in a tragic car accident. I think she got real angry with God, and so she pulled away from the church at that time. So it was just a beautiful thing, and I just felt so much joy after that.
Mm.
I felt uh, I just felt like the Lord was showing me like just a better way, just a better way to be, and no one got hurt. Everybody was fine. She got the sacraments, and then all the conversations after that. I was almost like I knew her my whole lifetime, because she was able to talk about issues in her family that she wasn't able to talk about before. So I really got to know some really beautiful things, and what she was going to do with her money and her estate. So that's where we went.
Wow, that's a beautiful story. When I think of you being the caregiver, I was fortunate enough to be involved in the care of my father the last 2 years of his life. And I look back, the large family, the ministry, traveling, I don't know how I did it. And it was so tough, but yet it was kind of like the old saying, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And yet now I'm so happy that I was asked by the Lord to do it, and I have no regrets, and no more phone calls from dad, no. And you miss those things. And what kind of words can you give to caregivers who are stressed out and discouraged or upset with themselves because they may lose it once in a while? And it's a tough walk, isn't it?
Yes, very much so. And being thrust in that position, I know I made like probably all the mistakes, in the world, is trying to to control the experience. And I think, like Christ did, he came into situation, and Saint Joseph too, right? I mean, he came into situations and um, met people where they were. He met them where they were. We have an agenda, we have our life, we have our things that we do, but to be able to just come in and just sit there and be silent with someone, let them just, and not, there were so many times I went over to, and just, there was silence. We didn't talk about anything. We just, knowing that I was there was important. And I was, in my brain was thinking like, what is happening in my life? So that was there was healing happening in me at the same time.
I remember when my mom was dying, she was in an Alzheimer's unit. My dad was debilitated, couldn't go visit her. And I went to sit with Dad. And it's like what you said. I didn't say a word. I didn't know what to say. We both were just praying and asking God to be merciful to my mom. And sometimes I look back and I say, well, I wish I would have said something to Dad. And but they're difficult times. But it's like the most important moment in your life after the moment of your birth is when you pass on. And most physicians never think about that because we're, like you said, we're thinking diagnoses and treatments and all this stuff. And this really helped you grow, didn't it?
It did. It really did. And as you were speaking about that, I just thought of, when she was in active death, see, I was still stuck. So it was after a football game. So I'm racing over to cover my nurse, and Joan is in active death, and the hospice nurse, was stuck way far away, and she wasn't going to get there in time. And just giving medicine to my patient, and just weird. It's like, am I giving too much? Am I going to kill the, just all the things as a physician that I was going through. But when all I did was I panicked. I was like, Lord, I usually do this in the hospital. I walk out and everything's taken care of. And so my wife, I called my wife, she's a nurse, and she said, get your rosary and pray. And I'll pray over here on this side. And I was like, oh my gosh, okay, duh, of course I'm going to pray. So I got my rosary out, and it was like the most, I think of Our Lady of Sorrows, because when I was in the room and I finished the rosary, there was exactly when the rosary was over that she expired. I'm like, wow. So there's this stillness, this brightness, and it almost, when I think about it, because I think about that room and how it just was transformed at the time of her death, where it was just got really bright, because it was later, and it was actually in the evening, and when that happened, her dog Punky was across the room, and Punky didn't like me. Okay, mm-hmm. Punky came walking over at that moment, laid down next to me, and put his head on my shoe.
Wow.
And I'm like just like he needed someone, because Joan was gone, and I just felt like, wow, this is pretty special. But the power of the prayer, the peace and the joy, and with the tears and everything going on, with the total, it was so surreal. And the Lord did that. He really wanted me to know. And then the next week when we buried her, there was no wake. I'm thinking, how many people die and go right to their burial site? So they bring the body, and I met there, and when we went to the grave site, we, I said a prayer. They asked me, and they open up the casket so I can, identify her in the casket. And I had one of my Nazareth football hats on, and I put it right on her chest when they closed the casket. I was thinking, because she, as you know from my story, that she donated her estate, the majority of her estate, to Nazareth Academy. And yeah, it was just like so such a weird. When I left, I was driving home, and I just was like, what happened? What happened the last year and a half of my life? And I called my wife again, and what did she say? She says, Tom, go to adoration, spend time with Jesus. And that's the gift Joan Valenta gave me. The gift to go spend time with Jesus and help him allow me to discern what is right, what I should be doing, how to get out of the way. And that's been, initially it was an intermittent thing, but after that it's a daily thing now, and it's just powerful.
In today's society, we seem to be a society that doesn't want to get involved. And yet you got involved. and you're such a busy guy to begin with, and then you got involved, but you probably got more out of this or as much as she did, didn't you?
I did. I really did. I think, the chapter on courage, when I was reached out to write the chapter, it was, the quote that I put on the football field. Now, I was not a regular Bible reader or anything like that, but the quote was from Deuteronomy 31:6. It was, be strong and courageous, do not fear because of them, because the Lord thy God goes with you. He'll never leave you nor forsake you. And I was just like, that's the quote. That's for Joan. And then as I was writing this and reflecting on her life, it actually was a quote for me. She had the courage to ask me that question in the office, to be there for her, because she was very estranged from all relationships. And it was actually, she taught me in that moment how I needed to face my fear, the fear of having to change my life, to order it according to the way God wanted me to live my life versus the way I chose to live my life. And so that's exactly, you're right, Brian, because that was the gift, was that cracked open a little opening in my heart, so I could keep, and it didn't hurt. At the end of the day, it was just this beautiful experience of being able to receive from God, from God our Father through Jesus.
When you mentioned the little crack in the door of your heart, there's a quote in St. Faustina's diary where the Lord and her talk about, if one can only open that door a crack, God's merciful love, the rays will penetrate their heart and the heart will crumble into dust. And I think that's what's happened to you, because when you think of being merciful, that's part of living the message of mercy. It's not just a relationship with God and you, it's with your people, your family, your loved ones, the people at work, your patients. And that's what we say, it's living the message. I want to ask you, though, I didn't ask about, you mentioned about getting involved in Unbound. Where does that tie in all this?
Yeah, that's a good point. So I think this experience with Joan prepared me for my my healing with Dr. Bob. I mean, I started, you know, getting more active in the church, but when Dr. Bob, when I got involved with Dr. Bob and the healing whole person and to be healed, I went down to Tallahassee for an IM prayer ministry training, and it's his style of prayer that it's a beautiful prayer ministry. But the problem was, when we started doing our retreats in our diocese, we couldn't send all our people down to Tallahassee. And so Father Burke, who Masters, who's a dear friend of mine, very active in our diocese, he and I thought of, well, let's do another ministry. So we brought Unbound Ministry to our diocese so we can train people to do prayer at our healing retreats that we do. So Unbound came to us, and obviously we could do it virtually with them. And then it's kind of a circle of time, because in May we're actually doing our first IM prayer ministry training up here. So Unbound came through the opening and the experience with Dr. Bob, understanding that we need to be able to learn how to pray with people. And that's where the gift, I think, too, is for me, is I've never been comfortable praying with other people. And now in the ministry, it's like drinking water. It's like, yeah, I probably pray with 80% of my patients every day.
Really? That's beautiful, because it's so discouraged, and you hear about healthcare professionals getting fired about wearing a cross or asking somebody if they want them to pray with them and things. But we can't be afraid to be Christians, can we?
No, not at all. No, it's so true. And then the other thing that followed Unbound, Brian, was the spiritual direction program, which I'm involved with. So Franciscan University now came out to our diocese, and we got 40 to 50 lay people and deacons going through the spiritual direction program, and I'm in my third year of that. So it's like my continuing medical education is all theological right now. It's pretty cool,
Now, what diocese are you in?
Joliet Diocese in yeah, right outside Chicago Diocese.
That's beautiful. Aren't you glad when you hit that fork in the road in your life that, like Robert Frost said, you took the road less traveled by? Because I know where I was years ago that I would have said, well, we got to get home care in and we got to see what the government can bring in, some agency to help you and this and that. And you took it a different path, and it really made all the difference, didn't it?
It was only by the grace of God and the love and support of the family, encouraging me. Because yeah, it was a desert road, and every step of the way it was like it forces you to stay in the moment, because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know, and so don't get too far away from where you're at. And so yeah, it was a gift, and looking back and just seeing how we have opportunities every day for being, and it may not be that dramatic, but every opportunity to face fear or help other people face their fears. That's what people come in. Think about it, we just got over this COVID period. It was all about fear. It's still fear. That fear has got to be healed. It's going to take decades for that to heal in our practice. The fear of immunizations, the fear of what the healthcare doing, the way the doctors responded, and I was included in that, maybe not as courageously as we should have on the front end, but we're good and we're going to get through it because we have our faith.
Below the image, we all know that the words Jesus wanted were, Jesus, I trust in you. And fear contradicts trust. They're at 180 degrees apart. You can't have all this fear, and yet so many people have this fear. Tom, any closing thoughts in this journey before we wrap up today's show?
I think probably the most important thing, because of how busy the world is, and obviously that's Satan's playground. And so my main thought that I treasure right now is silence. And so I recommend silence and breathing. That's the other thing. Silence and breathing. It's the first thing we do. It's the last thing we do. And our breath is a very powerful source of quieting our nervous system to allow us to get into silence and spend time. Because there are only two people present when you're alone in silence, and it's us and the Lord. And just to quiet yourself enough so then all the other senses become magnified. Because that's what adoration did for me. That's what sitting alone with Joan Valenta did for me. And that's what now I thrive for that. I thrive for that. And I adjust my schedule so that I have that time. So that's my message.
And it's so beautiful as we're in this period in our church of a Eucharistic revival to help people to understand the importance of prayer, the Eucharist, the sacraments, living our faith, and fighting the good fight and running the good race. So, which is what you've done, Tom. Tom, I want to thank you for joining me today on Mercy Unbound. People, I hope you enjoyed the show. Share and subscribe, and go back and again look at some of these earlier shows. Carrie and Dwayne Daunt on their books, Man Your Post, Learning to Lead Like St. Joseph. Tom's story is in there. Show 101 with Michelle Johnson on Walking the Way of the Cross for caregivers. Tom gives a beautiful example of that. And then the Unbound ministry, we go into detail in show 71 and 72 with Lloyd and Nancy Greenhall. But Dr. Tom Nelson, I want to thank you for joining me on Mercy Unbound, and keep up the great work and being a reflection of this image of Jesus Christ to your patients and people you meet and encounter every day. God bless you.
God bless you too. Thank you, Brian, for having me.
Thank you. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel for the video portion. The podcast can be heard at anchor.fm/Dr. Brian, Bryan Thatcher, Thatcher, and on all the major podcast forums. I would love to speak at your church or conference, and please consider supporting our efforts to spread the truth to a hurting world. Thank you again. And for more information, go to the website at drbryanThatcher.com.